Vergangenheitsbewältigung, Erinnerungskultur, Vergangenheitsaufarbeitung. By the end of this 15-minute talk, I'd appreciate it if you could all pronounce this. Hi, my name is Fiver. I'm a conceptual artist, and this is me up here in school. I am German, and we learned that history is our responsibility. This is me in a play. In front of me is my Turkish friend Naima, and next to me is my Jewish friend Petra. And we were working on a play about the history of fascism and how that affects us today, and the dangers of racism and how that affects us. When I was 19, I moved to the UK, and I experienced culture shock. I thought that I knew how the world worked, but then I discovered that some people take milk in their tea, and they queue for the bus stop. And it took me the best part of 20 years to get the hang of how to live in the UK as a German. And then I moved to Dubai. And then I moved to New Zealand, and then I came here. I'm an artist, as you can see. My work is out there too. And when I'm confused, I pick up my sketchbook. So when I lived in the UK, I spent a lot of time in London, and I'd walk around and I would sketch the beautiful places, the palaces, the big houses, the parks, the amazing museums. And it made me think about, where did all the money come from for this fantastic place? I moved to the Netherlands and lived there for a while. And I had the same thought. You go to Amsterdam, it's a beautiful city, and it's a very small country. So you're thinking, how did it get so rich? And then I found out that the Dutch have a period they call the Golden Age. So one of the things that I do in my process is that I collect information about everything that I see. And it helps me to understand what a place is like, and it helps me to see how a country sees itself in its history. I also do research. So in my travels around the internet, I found a thing called the Slave Voyages database. It's run by University College London, and it's a huge archive of information, historical information about the trade in enslaved people. So it has ship manifests, it has the names of owners, it has the number of people that were taken on board, men, women, children, babies. It tells you how many were taken on and how many survived the voyage. It tells you if there were slave revolts. I started using the information that I found in that database. The other thing I did is I went a few years ago to an exhibit at the Slave Lodge here in Cape Town, and there was a show that talked about the slaves that had been freed at the end of colonialism in Réunion. So I found names of people that they'd given themselves after they had been freed. And you can see some of these names on here, and you can see some of these objects out there. I also discovered places, names of places. I focused on the names in the Netherlands because I was living there at the time, and I discovered that there are a lot of places where, if you've ever been to the Netherlands, it's a pretty little country. It has these cute, quaint little towns, and I found that a lot of these places, which are lovely, have a sustained involvement in the history of slavery. So they would provide manpower, they would provide ships, they would provide equipment or soldiers. So another thing that I found in the Netherlands is a book. It's a photo book that shows, it's the kind of book that you see when you make a book about who we are. who we are as South Africans or who we are as Dutch. So this was a book that showed what the Dutch think of themselves. So the Dutch think of themselves as a country of windmills, and they have lovely countryside, and they have sturdy people, they have traditions, they're really good people. And I started writing. I write in my art because I like to meditate on the words that I use. I like to process and think and reflect in detail. So when you're handwriting, it's very slow and you can think. So I use this book to write the names of enslaved people that are found in the Slave Voyages database. Now, that list of names that exists in there is massive. It's tens of thousands of names. It's huge. And the names come from when people were taken off the ships after the British abolished the trade in enslaved people. So they would go in the Atlantic and they would pick people off the ships and they would impound the ships, and then they would drop people wherever they were closest. So some people would be dropped in South America and some people went back to Africa, but often very far away from their homes. So I took that list and I started writing. And I used this book and I started on the first page with A, and I kept writing and I kept writing. And by the end of the book, I got to J. Now, there are 10,000s of names. I was never going to fit them into this book. But what I did is I filtered this list. And I filtered by age and I filtered by gender. So this book, I only use names of girls under 16 who'd been taken off slave ships. And I filled the whole book with names of girls under 16, and I only got to J. I have an installation at the Run Club in Johannesburg. I have an exhibition there. It's on until the end of March. And the Run Club is a historical building in the CBD in Johannesburg. It's a very beautiful historical building, but it is an extremely contested space. So some people think the Run Club is a picture of the grandeur of Johannesburg. It's been there since 1890 something. Some people think it's a symbol of the oppressor. Some people think it should be preserved. Some people think it should be pulled down. This installation piece is in the central dome of the staircase, and it is called Given, Donated, Placed. Now, I've told you I use words in my art. And last year I was at the British Museum and there was an exhibition about Indian artifacts, sculptures. And they were very beautiful. It was a big exhibition, but what really interested me is the labels, because the labels tell you what the work is about, but they also tell you how it ended up in the British Museum. And there were about 100 pieces, and they had all kinds of euphemisms. So there was given, there was acquired, transferred, gifted, offered, great words. There was one object that had the label looted. Now, the British were in India for best part of 300 years. So now you're thinking, well, how can you legitimately acquire artifacts from an occupied country, right? Is it even possible to buy something at a fair price? Is it even possible to be given something? So the work that I've done is reflecting on the euphemisms that we use in order to protect ourselves from our history. Now, we just had a little chat about shame and guilt, and I'm not a big fan of those words because my important concept is that we are responsible for our history. When we feel shame or guilt, that doesn't really help us to do anything. But when we feel responsible, we can say, I wasn't alive, this wasn't me personally, but it is something that belongs to my heritage, and I can take that information and put it into the future. I can make the present a better place, I can make the future a better place. So I was invited to the Run Club, which was fantastic because it is such an incredible building. And one of the things I loved is when I started, the event organizer said to me, let's decolonize the Run Club. And I thought that was great because it's a very South African phrase. And I really loved working there because I think that there's a very positive attitude to look at these spaces and to look at this history and say, well, okay, now what are we going to do with it? I love factoids. I love pieces of information that illuminate things. So one example is you go to a museum, you see a lovely landscape of Suriname, somewhere like that, and you think, oh, that's very beautiful. But what you don't know is that the reason this painting was made is that it was trying to sell stolen land to European farmers to make plantations. Now, this often happens in museums because museums are very reluctant to indicate the relationship of its objects to the history of slavery or the history of empire. This is a piece from the Rijksmuseum. It's a classic example. It's a crown. It was made by British merchants in the 17th century for the King of Abra, which is now Benin. It was an object that was meant to facilitate trade relations between the King of England and the King of Abra. Now, it's a beautiful item, but there's a problem with it. The jewels are made of glass, the gold-looking metal is copper, and it's really a piece of tat. It's not worth anything, and I think it's a really great symbol for the idea that we are pretending respect, but it's actually not real. And I think when we look at the trade agreements that Europeans made with the African continent, that is exactly what happened. It was about deceit, it was about disrespect. So I made a piece that used cheap fabric, cheap beads, it used cardboard, it used string, it used plastic lace, and it used genuine Joburg rubbish. And it was all covered in gold and resin, and it's symbolizing the idea that something can look very fancy, but it can still be a lie. I have a friend who's a documentary photographer. Her mother is English, and her father is Black South African. And she said to me, one of the problems with dealing with decolonization work is that it focuses on the Black experience. So it's really, it's a problem for Black people. She says, if there was no white culture, there would not be a race issue. And I think it's an interesting idea because as a white person, as a white European, it is my responsibility to reframe history. It is my responsibility to say, I wasn't alive then, but I benefit from it. I grew up in a continent that is extremely privileged in world history. And my responsibility is to take a step to the left and say, how can I look at history from a different angle? How can I look at what happened in the past in order to learn from that, in order to understand not just this privileged position that I'm in, and this as a European, as a white European, where my worldview is centered everywhere, and say, okay, what more is there out there? What do I think is normal, and what do other people see as a new perspective? And what I'd like to do in my life, and what my work is for, somebody asked me about what is the purpose of my work, is to say, okay, let's take a step, let's look from a different angle and take responsibility and try and use that in order to build better communities and to build a better future. I just want to finish with the obligatory Mandela quote. I like friends who have independent minds because they tend to make you see problems from all angles. And I think that that is what I want to end in. Thank you very much.